Nepal is in turmoil. This tiny country sandwiched between India and China, which is an important detail, is going through one of its most dramatic uprisings in modern history, and India needs to pay close attention. What started off with something that sounded fairly simple, a ban on social media, turned into a complete uprising where parliament was torched, political leaders' homes were set on fire, 30 people were dead and thousands were injured. The Prime Minister resigned overnight and the army is now patrolling the streets. But here's the thing, it was not about social media. It was Gen Z's entire generation uprising against corruption, nepotism, decades of misrule and the lack of opportunity. For us in India, there are two reasons why this is worrying and we need to pay attention. First of all, Nepal is our closest neighbor. We have an open border, we have deep cultural ties, and we have vital economic connections with the country. Secondly, the anger that exploded there and the reasons for that anger sound uncomfortably familiar for us in India as well. So in this video, we're going to break down three major pockets. One, what happened in Nepal and how did it escalate so quickly? Two, why is it worrying for the entire neighborhood, especially for India? And three, could something like this ever happen back home in India? Is that a risk we run at all? Now, before I start, remember, like, share, subscribe, and of course, sign up for our membership. That will really help us. And leave us a comment in the comment section on what you think is possible or not possible in this case. Let's start off first by what happened in Nepal, right? Now, for the last 17 years, Nepal has changed 14 governments and not one of them have fully completed a term. The leaders have switched alliances whenever it suited them. Coalition governments have collapsed. Corruption scandals have piled up. In one case, two political parties at opposite ends of the aisle actually came together to form the government in order to avoid corruption investigations against each other. Citizens, especially young people, saw this political class as disconnected from reality. In September, Oli's government banned 26 social media platforms, saying that they hadn't registered with the authorities. What it effectively did was, overnight, Facebook, Instagram, X just went dark. And what that meant for a generation that spends all of its time online is that it wasn't just an attack on their ability to communicate, it was an attack on their identity, on their forms of expression, on the power of information. It was suddenly like turning the lights out. And there was a big reaction. Now, at the same time, there was something called a Nepo Kid movement that was happening across Nepal. It was trending on TikTok, it was trending on Reddit. Young Nepalis were posting videos of ministers' children who were driving imported cars. They were showing off luxury brands. They were holidaying abroad or going to fancy universities overseas. And the question that was being asked was, how can they afford this when ordinary citizens are struggling to find jobs and struggling to make ends meet? And it struck a chord. So Gen Z demonstrations really should be taken at the backdrop of Nepal's political landscape and its economic landscape, right? So Indian Express has put out a report where it said that almost every political leader in the country right now in Nepal faces a corruption charge one way or the other. This includes the Prime Minister who has just resigned and the last 5 Prime Ministers who had severe corruption charges against them. Now, on the economic side, according to the World Bank report, 82% of the workforce in Nepal remains in informal employment. They don't have formal jobs. 82% of the workforce. That is massively higher than global or regional averages, which means there's simply no jobs to be had in Nepal. And it causes, as we know very well, young people from Nepal to have to leave Nepal, largely come to India or go to other countries looking for jobs. Now, the power has continued to circulate among the same set of people, the same aging, colluding leaders, apparently, who are shifting alliances, like I told you, in order to maintain their power and maintain their convenience. Now, this has led to those protests. And the interesting part, the Indian Express report talks about how in 2008, there were protests that brought down the monarchy and asked for a democratically elected government. People have gotten so disenchanted with that democratically elected government that they're asking for the monarchy to come back. That's how desperate the situation is. In fact, there's another report that said 20% of the people in Nepal remain in poverty. For Gen Z, the lack of meaningful opportunities has produced desperation. 2,000 young people leave Nepal every day looking for jobs. Young people, officially, the youth unemployment stands at 20%, though actual levels are certainly higher than that. There is deep wage insecurity as well. So people are, they don't have jobs, they're being forced to leave the country, they're not able to make ends meet. And at the same time, because everybody now lives their life on social media, the children of these ministers, the children of the rich people who effectively prop up their government, they can see them living their best lives overseas. They have everything, they have the cars, the watches, the money, and that really angered people. It's also the same thing that's making people uncomfortable in India as well. And we're going to come back to that. But what effectively happened, where the trigger came from, one report says a viral video of an 11-year-old girl who was run over by a minister's speeding vehicle, and the vehicle didn't stop. Apparently, the Prime Minister dismissed it as a normal accident and promised to pay the medical bills. But the public that was already seething with corruption and arrogance reached its breaking point. Students, activists, young professionals poured out into the streets of Kathmandu and other big cities. They carried placards that said, "Shut down corruption," and not social media. It said, "KP Chor, Desh Chor," which effectively means that you're a thief, leave the country. And by nightfall, clashes broke out and the security forces opened fire. What followed was simply anarchy. People got angry. Parliament was stormed. It was set ablaze. Private homes of politicians were torched, ransacked, malls were ransacked. The former Prime Minister's wife died because she was trapped in one such fire. Ministers are having to be evacuated by helicopter from their homes because the mobs are just coming into their homes and taking everything, burning whatever they don't want, looting whatever they do want. The Prime Minister resigned and the army took charge of security, but even then protesters have refused to back down. And right now, Nepal is currently, while this entire Gen Z uprising, apparently we were told, had no leader, it was sort of, it just came up, even though social media was banned, it came up on Reddit and it came up via TikTok. There are some leaders now who are in conversation with the army to try and find an interim Prime Minister or an interim leader to take the country through this difficult time. Now, while that happens, let's take a look at the cost and why it's worrying for us back home in India. 30 people killed, more than 1,000 injured. Thousands of prisoners have been set free from jail. A whole generation now sees politicians as their enemy. For India, Nepal shares a 1,750-kilometer border with India. Over 3.5 million Nepalis work in India. So effectively, we have a lot of migration, we have trade disruptions, we have possibility of security risks. Nepal depends on India for oil, for food, for trade routes, for bilateral trade, which is worth nearly $8.5 billion. And we have a lot of work going back and forth between these two countries. But if we take a step back and look at the entire neighborhood of where India is sitting right now geopolitically, we've witnessed tectonic shifts in all of our neighbors, right? You remember the Sri Lankan economic crisis and then the ouster of Imran Khan in Pakistan, which reminded me a lot of what we're seeing right now. We had people sort of, march into big houses and walk away with ration and walk away with whatever they found interesting. I remember this one visual where one guy found a mutton korma and he took it with him because he thought it was a good idea. There was a regime change in Bangladesh, which was also led by protests from the youth. And now we're seeing a very familiar sort of thing unfold in Nepal as well, our very quiet, very peaceful mountainous neighbor. So there are patterns really across South Asia that are playing out. So Sri Lanka in 2022, where the Rajapakshas were forced out after protests of corruption. In Bangladesh in last year, where Sheikh Hasina was forced out. Nepal now with Gen Z. So 3 neighbors in 3 years. For India, this is not just about Nepal now. This becomes a regional warning. Now, remember I started off by telling you that Nepal is sandwiched between India and China. This is important because the former Prime Minister Oli, who just left Nepal, was very tilted towards China. He signed the Belt and Road Initiative for China. He visited Beijing before he visited New Delhi, and he endorsed Xi Jinping's security framework, which means that he was very close to China. We also know that the US was worried about China's rising influence in the neighborhood as well. So this year, Donald Trump's administration actually negotiated and brought back what they call the Millennium Challenge Nepal Compact, a package of energy and road upgrade projects where the US promised to pump about $500 million in aid for Nepal. And this was meant to rival the China's Belt and Road Initiative because both the US and China are wrestling for influence in Nepal. Now, Oli's participation in China's Victory Day parade has been viewed as Nepal firmly being in the anti-US camp. So, US is interested in terms of India and China as well. Now, India, of course, shaking hands with China recently, but Nepal is geopolitically and geographically a very important player in this, and influence over Nepal is very important. So, a lot of analysts are now asking how this seemingly domestic, seemingly young people's uprising, which had no leader, escalated so quickly if there was no global power at hand. Did some other foreign power have a hand to play in this? Because now we are seeing young people come back onto the streets in Nepal. They're sweeping up the mess. They're saying, we never intended for it to go this far. We never intended for all of this to happen. We didn't want this kind of violence. So was there something else at play? Whatever the truth is, really, instability in Kathmandu is actually anxiety for New Delhi, for Beijing, and for Washington. Now, here's the question a lot of people have quietly been asking me, right? Nobody wants to ask this question up front, saying, is this possible in India? Because, we have the kind of things that people are frustrated about in Nepal seems like the kind of things people could be frustrated about in India. Let's take a look at it, right? We have the world's largest young population. We have like the largest group of Gen Z lives in India right now, FYI. Unemployment is high in India as well, between say 12% to 17%. We know that there is a generation of degree holders that's struggling to get good jobs across the country. There is a massive nepotism debate in almost every industry that we look at, where people find jobs for their own kids. This is in politics, this is in the judiciary, it is in almost every course of business. The rich are becoming richer and richer. The nepo kid sort of anger, we've heard it in India as well. The inequality we've heard right now in India is worse than what it was during the British rule. So things are not good in India as well. We've had internet clampdowns, in Haryana where there is a protest, in Kashmir or in Manipur, we've had internet clampdowns there as well. So crony capitalism, corruption is a recurring theme, young people feeling like they're losing faith in institutions. But can the frustration reach a point where we have this kind of an uprising in India? According to me and according to some of the people in my team, absolutely not. That's a flat no, right? Again, we're not predicting the future, but let's take a look at why not in India. India is, for example, just the scale of our democracy. The structure of our democracy is so massive between national and state elections and the mechanisms that we have that overthrowing a government doesn't make sense in India, because you could never galvanize that kind of support because we're so different. I mean, imagine if someone got really, really angry with any government, whether that is state or center, you would have pockets of the country who would not be on board because of the plurality, because we're so different, because UP would feel differently about a problem, Bengal, Kerala, South India, Maharashtra, Punjab, everybody would have a different approach to a problem. So India ever having that kind of anger where they would see an overflow against the government, I don't see that happening. I think maybe the last time we were truly angry as a people was the Nirbhaya protests, and even then, look how that played out, right? The court stepped in, we had new laws that were written out, people protested, and there was change that was actioned out of that anger. Now, this is my personal take, and I want to put this out as my personal take. The reason why I don't believe that India will see that kind of violent uprising is because we were born from peaceful protest. And so it is in our DNA as a people to be peaceful. And I know that there's, who really believes in that anymore, but think about it, right? When the farmer protests happened and they camped outside of Delhi for months and months and months on end, it was peaceful. When the Maratha Andolan came into Mumbai recently and clamped down our roads and annoyed everybody and created massive traffic jams, it was peaceful though. We've had pockets where things have gotten a little out of hand. In India, riots normally happen community to community, rarely against the establishment itself. Also because our establishment is so strong. We have the police, we have the rapid action, we have the Central Reserve Police, we have the army, we have a lot of layers of structure that come into play. And more importantly, and we could debate the strength or the weakness, but we have really solid democratic structures. So when something goes wrong in our country and we get upset about it, the courts normally immediately take suo motu cognizance and they start to push for solutions. Remember COVID, where the courts started to step in and say, why is there no oxygen? Why are there no solutions being offered? Why are the hospitals overcrowded? So the courts tend to form a redressal mechanism. So it's repeatedly said, sort of letting out the steam. So freedom of expression, the ability to stand on the street and protest, the ability to go to court and have your say, to have a court be seized of the matter over and above the government and tell the government they're doing something wrong, the ability to have your opposition parties actually raise your questions in parliament or in state assembly, these are all valves that release pressure in a democracy. So when people are upset or angry or discontent, these are all various ways in which you can release the pressure so it doesn't build up to a point where it finally explodes. And I genuinely believe that our democratic structures are still alive and kicking. We have to, of course, there's a separate video to be done about how we need to protect these democratic structures and we need to guard them carefully in order to make sure they're not eroded, in order to make sure they continue to function really well. And then, of course, there is the election process. Another process that we need to guard, very, very carefully, because the idea that you can change your government, state, center, city, if you are unhappy, is something that we hold very true in our hearts in India. That we have options of politicians, that we have options of ideas, that we have options of ideologies. And the fact that we have so many options in our multi-party system, that if you don't like A and you don't like B, there's always C, and option number D is you become a politician yourself, right? These are all options that are available to you. And I personally believe that that is the reason why we'll never see the anger sort of bubble over in India. And also we are a giant, massive country, right? It's not about just rioting in one city or in one part that will overthrow the government in the entire country. It's simply not possible. And I do believe that our ideas of our non-violent protest, our ideas of democracy are so deep-rooted, our plurality, our federal system, that we have structures at the state level and structures at the central level. These are all things that keep India strong, keep the people safe, and make sure something like this, at least in my mind, would never happen. I'd love to know what you think, though. Do you think that this is at all possible in India? Do you disagree with what I have said? Please leave me a comment and we'll have this conversation even further.